Hi, everyone, and welcome to the latest Career Talks. Please welcome Madeline Mann, who is a career coach and the creator of Self-Made Millennial. Welcome, Madeline.
Hello, Andrew. So good to be here.
Yeah, it's so wonderful to talk to you again. And Madeline, today we're talking all about job interviews, which is something that people love because they love getting interviews, but at the same time, they usually are terrified of the interview process. And, a lot of the job interview comes with the mentality of it. So, how do you psych yourself up for it? How do you prepare for it? What mentality should job seekers go into interviews with?
I think that when we get into an interview, we are so concerned with performing properly. We think, I'm going to go into this interview and answer their questions to the best of my ability. And what we then lose is this whole other mentality of, first, let me make sure that I am evaluating this opportunity as well. Companies actually like it when you evaluate the opportunity. It feels more mutual, feels like you're a highly valued candidate. And second, that you're not just thinking about, am I answering the questions at face value to their satisfaction, but thinking about what is the information that is going to be important for them to know about me to make a good decision. Now, if you aren't really seeing the question under the question, you're typically just going to answer things at face value, and you're likely not going to do well in the interview.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. So should you go in there, make it like a sales pitch then, sort of making you yourself the product and saying, listen, I'm going in there, my objective is to close the deal and that I want to sell them the product, which is myself?
I think that also you can go in a way, because I think the sales pitch idea, you're right in that it needs to speak to their needs. But something that can actually help you, because I know people feel weird about selling themselves, think of yourself like a doctor diagnosing their problem, and you are the solution.
Yeah, no, that's a great point, because I always like to say that employers are selfish and it's always about what you can do for them. It's not necessarily by saying that I've done X, Y, and Z in my past. They want to know what you are going to do for them in the coming months and years. So I think that that's usually such a great approach, like you said, is to say you're the doctor and you're diagnosing the problem. And obviously there are questions that are part of the interview process, though. So how should people prepare for them? Because there's obviously the greatest hits. So why don't we go through some of them? And the first one, I think, is always the interesting one, which is, where do you see yourself in 5 years? Because that may be on the lifespan of a job.
Okay, yeah. So before we go through all of the steps, I do want to say that the where do you see yourself in 5 years is this question that is actually, I've seen so many people get rejected because of this question. It happens all the time. And a lot of people, the way that they'll answer is they'll say something like, in about 5 years, I'd really be interested in opening my own coffee shop. I'd love to move to closer to my family, maybe have like our firstborn kid, and then maybe have the title of, X or whatever, right? That is not what the company wants to hear. It might be the truth, but you're taking this answer in different directions than what's important to the company. Going off of what you said, Andrew, what the company is looking for is, how does this role fit long-term? Are you going to leave us as soon as that location down the street where you can rent out for your coffee shop opens up? And this is why so many people lose the opportunity when they answer this question, is because they might even say a different type of profession or a different type of industry. And it really shows the company, okay, you're just taking this job to fill a hole right now until you can get your dream job. And these companies are looking for longevity.
Yeah, no, that's definitely a good point, because especially, if you're going in there as a relatively young person or entry-level job, where they say, where do you see yourself in 5 years? You don't want to be the person who says, I want to be retired, or I want to run a surf shop on Turks and Caicos or something like that, because the company wants to invest in you and they want to know that you're going to grow with them, right?
Yes. And go ahead, everyone, put in 5 in the chat if you've ever been asked this question of this 5 years. And we don't know where we're going to be in 5 years. So here's how you actually answer this question. So when you're asked, where do you see yourself in 5 years? There's several different things that you want to put into your answer. And we'll show you the slide now to kind of give you a bit of guidance. So you can focus on only professional goals. So don't talk about, wanting to move closer to family or your coffee shop that you want to open up that has nothing to do with this customer support manager role that you're interviewing for. How this role fits with your career path. So I see this customer support manager role being kind of the next step up in my career, as I have been a team lead, but I really want to grow my expertise in managing others. Over the next 5 years, I want to build leadership skills so that I can be someone who has a team that is highly retained and highly performing, and blah, 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 right? So do you notice how I'm not talking about what title I want next? Or, what that I want to take someone else's job. Instead, the last bullet was talking about was the skills you would build, the you being a go-to person in a certain department. So think about what this role will contribute to your career and how that will help you evolve for the next 5 years, instead of saying, okay, well, I probably want this job title and I probably want to work at this other place. No, let's think holistically about what you're going to gain from this and who you hope to be, the accomplishments you hope to make in the next 5 years.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really great point. And I think that's such a smart way to answer the question. And I'm watching the comments and I see a lot of 5s in there. And then I even saw, I think it was Joy said that she was asked this question today. So it shows you that this is definitely a question that's coming up in interviews, and it's obviously come up quite a bit. And it's really, it's the outline you provided is such a smart way, because it's impossible to know exactly what it's going to look like in 5 years. I know I've only been at LinkedIn for almost 4 years, and the job I have now did not exist when I joined the company, 3 and 3/4 of a year ago, because I created this position for myself, basically. So, it's so difficult to say, like, I want to be this position when it doesn't exist. Whereas if you focus on your professional goals, what you want to be in yourself in terms of, a professional or a career, I think that's such a good way to go about it. So I think that's really good.
Incredible. Yeah.
Yeah. And, and then there's always the question that people get to when they say, why should we hire you? Which it always seems like sort of a resigning question, like, do my work for me. Why should I hire you? What's your advice for people who come up against that question?
Andrew, you hit it, the head on the nail right there. So the nail on the head, rather. Yes. So when someone is asking you this, why should we hire you, feels almost like a challenge. So before we get into the details, I'll go through kind of what typically happens here. So when you're asked this question, it's typically like a challenge. So it might feel like, okay, so why should we hire you? Say something interesting about it. And what it actually is the person saying, hey, I'm looking at a notebook full of notes. Just summarize it for me. Just tell me why I should root for you and make it all easy for me. So put me in the chat if you've also been asked this question, and it can really throw you off. So here are the steps to actually answer it in a really great way. So the first step you want to do is to have more of a consultative approach. So if you are, like as we're talking about, if you are the doctor diagnosing the problem, if someone says, why should we hire you? Well, first review the role. Say, well, looking at the role, and as we went over the job description and in the interviews, it looks like the top 3 priorities are first, onboarding new clients. Second are, creating, different ways to report on their progress. And third is upselling clients, right? And so that's what you'd start out with, is you're really meeting them where they are. The second step would be to describe relevant experience and skills. So now you would talk about when in your past have you done those things, and say, well, for example, I built out the onboarding process at my last company for new clients, where we're able to, have the ramp up time go from X to Y. And you're giving them examples so that they understand your expertise and how that connects to their goals. And third, you want to ask the interviewer. And this is one of my favorite parts, Andrew, is making any interview a conversation. And since you are being this doctor, you're diagnosing the situation, you ask them, does that align with what you're seeing? Are these the types of priorities you're seeing for this role? And as I'm characterizing them, did I miss anything? And at that moment, you are then going to hear from them, basically, did you answer the question very well? They might go, oh my gosh, yes, Andrew, that's exactly what we're looking for. Or they might say, well, I would say one of the most important parts is this other piece. And then you can discuss it there and you can then address it on the spot versus wondering if you answered right and maybe you missed something and maybe that thing that you missed, you actually are really good at, but you didn't have a chance to speak to it because you didn't ask the follow-up question.
Yeah. And one thing I'm wondering too, and this is something that I've suggested to people over the years, is that when you do get a question such as, why should I hire you? That's also a place to show that you've done your research on the company, because like you said, you're the doctor diagnosing the situation. So if you've been really researching the company and you say, hey, listen, I know that your primary clientele is in this area of the workforce, or maybe your industry is pretty much constrained to this one area, but I think we can move it into this direction or that direction or something like that. That way it shows that you've done your research, but it's not sort of going too hard on it, but you're also saying like, I can help you do that and I'm sort of fixing a problem for you. What do you think about something like that?
Exactly. It really is always about understanding their perspective. And yeah, if you did your research and you're dropping in some of these things like, well, and I saw in the blog last month with the product release that you all are going to be changing this come Q4. So I'm assuming that in this role, I'll probably need to focus more on why, right? And so that then their eyes bug open. They say, wow, this person is incredible. We need to hire them.
Yeah, no, I think that's definitely something that people can sort of show off for themselves, because they're basically giving you a platform with that question of saying, tell me how to sell you to my friends and coworkers, because they're the ones who are going to be sort of advocating for you internally. So they're wanting the little nuggets that they could take and sort of go into HR, go into the hiring manager or something like that, that says, this is why I think this person is the best fit. And they're basically giving you the pathway to make that case for them, right?
Exactly. They are rooting for you. The best case scenario in the interview for the company is that you rock it, that you are the best person they see. And so remember, it is a hiring process, not a rejection process. So you showing up, doing your best, like they want to see it and they want to take all the information, pass along and say, we're done, hire this person, let's go do the rest of our work.
Definitely. And before we get to the next question, I just want to remind everyone in the stream to get your own questions in, because we're going to be taking them in just a little bit. We have a few other questions to get through that I'm going to be asking, but I'm going to be taking yours in just a bit. So we're going to getting those, so get them in the comments. And Madeline, I guess the next question, and this is probably one of the ones that I hear people get tripped up on the most, is the classic, tell me about yourself. Because a lot of people, they're great at maybe talking about the skills they have or past experiences. But when it comes to actually defining yourself and knowing how to describe yourself, people sort of go like, how should people answer that question?
Andrew, this question is arguably one of the hardest. And I want people to put in the chat, how long do you think you typically take to answer this question? Is it 30 seconds? Is it 5 minutes? Is it 15 minutes? And Andrew, I've interviewed thousands of job seekers when I worked in HR. I've heard people answer all across those different amounts of time. So put in the chat how long you typically take to answer this question. But the thing is that there's so many things you could say in your answer. And so it's very difficult to figure out, what should I say? How should I zero in on it? And this is your first impression typically in the interview. So unfortunately, there is a lot of pressure for you to make a great impression. So here's how you do it. You first, step one, want to say who you are. When I say who you are, I'm talking about your profession. So I'm a human resources leader in the technology industry who specializes in high growth startups. Okay, so it might be as simple as that. The second step is your highlight reel. So focusing on several different accomplishments you've had in your past or examples of your work that are actually pertaining to what they're looking for, not just your most fun and interesting accomplishments like you traveled to 40 different companies. No, like, are you a good HR manager or not? Not, are you well traveled? And then the third step is why this opportunity. So kind of wrapping it up for them into a nice little bow of why is this the best next step for you? Now, if that was a lot, and I've actually had a lot of people say that this question, that they need to do a lot of work on it. So I do have a worksheet that we'll also share at the end of it, which is just at www.madelinemann.com/tell-me. And you can use this worksheet, tell me about yourself worksheet. There's examples on there too. So you can build out this answer because it'll change your game.
Yeah, and I'm looking at the comments, and I think most people say they take about 2 to 5 minutes to answer that question. Probably a little bit on the shorter side, I would say. There's a lot of 2s in there, but there's also 2 to 3. But most of them seem to keep it between 2 and 5 minutes. So what do you think about that, Lane?
I think that's good. I like the 2 minute. I don't think you should go beyond 2 minutes. If you're taking 5 minutes, if this is a 25-minute phone interview, you just use, a huge chunk of that interview doing a tell me about yourself. That's way too long. I typically say probably about 1 minute to 2 minutes is best, because here's the thing, Andrew. They are not asking you this question because this is their burning question that they have been waiting to get on the phone with you to ask. They're asking you this to break the ice, to get them oriented with your resume. So this is not the main show. This is like the previews at the beginning of the movie.
Yeah, no, that's definitely, I think, like you said, the preview. And, and I think one of the other questions that always comes up in interviews, and it's almost cliche at this point, are strengths and weaknesses. And I think, I want to take them individually because usually people do get them individually. And, when people say, what are your strengths? How should people answer that without coming off as obnoxious? Because obviously there could be people who say, listen, I am absolutely wonderful with people. I, have saved my last company from bankruptcy, something like that. How should people approach that question? Are they looking for personal strengths? Are they looking for hard skills? How should people answer that?
Oh my gosh, Andrew, I think that's one of the strangest part of the job interview is you're expected to talk yourself up, but but don't be cocky, right? It's like this strange balance that we always have to work with. So with strengths and weakness questions, it is a little bit of again, like the interviewer just wanting to not have to use so much brain power. Basically, what they could do is they could ask you like behavioral interview questions and deduce what are your strengths based on the way you answer. Here, this person's just saying, I'm probably going to manage you. You might become my team member. What are you good at? What are you not good at? I just want to understand, your range of skills and how I should best manage you. It's a pretty innocent question. So let me pop up some of the steps you want to do for strengths question. So first, you want to name the strength that matches a key competency for the role. Now, I'm not someone who typically says you should self-describe all the time in the interview, but here you might say, okay, one of my best strengths is really detailed project management. Okay, so you're stating that, but here's the key, Andrew. In order for us to move away from being braggy or just kind of not having enough content in there for them to truly believe it's your strength, you need to then give them an example of a time you exemplified that strength. So for example, I built out the entire project management flow for my last company where I did X, Y, and Z, which led to A, B, and C results. So then it feels like they truly can see your strengths because you're giving an example versus you just being like, I'm just really organized. I am a driven professional and you can always count on me. No one wants to hear that.
Yeah, no, I think that is a really good point because the strengths one is really interesting because it's one of those things where you can sort of, pad your accomplishments and things like that, but you could also sort of go wrong. And I think the next question is the one where there's really a high risk of going wrong, which is tell me your greatest weakness, or tell me about your weaknesses, because, and this one I think trips people up, because inherently I think a lot of people know that when it comes to getting a job, a lot of times HR people or recruiters or hiring managers, especially if they're still trying to narrow down the group, it's more about exclusion. So they're looking for reasons to get you out of the running because they want to get it down to maybe the top 3 or top 2. So when it comes to the weaknesses, I think a lot of people fall on the crutch of, and again, I think this might be a cliche, where they say, I work just too hard, or I'm a perfectionist. And it's just like, no, you're not. And I think most people will say that that's a terrible answer. So what is your tip for people when they say, what's your greatest weakness?
Yes. Okay, you hit that's absolutely what people typically say. They always go to, yes, I work too hard, or I'm a perfectionist. I'm also curious to hear in the chat, you can put in strengths, weaknesses, or both if you've been asked one or both of these questions. So I'm curious to see if everyone's getting the weakness question, not the strengths, or they're getting both or whatnot. So I would say that for the weakness question, it is important. Everyone does have weaknesses. So I do not teach the idea that you should try to dodge this question. I also don't teach this idea where you should go for really, really honest answer, where you're basically saying a huge part of the role is something that you really struggle with, because yes, that would likely jeopardize your ability to land the role. So here's what you want to do is you want to first kind of understand something that you're not that great at. It's obviously has to be related. Like, I think once I was like, oh, I'm bad at memorizing things. I think I said that when I was in college, when I was interviewing for something. The job had nothing to do with memorization, but I just blurted out. You want to name something that's actually legitimately a skill that could be used in the job. So you name something you're not that great at. And then the step 2 is what's so important, is that you explain how you've been working on it. So this shows that you're humble. You notice that you're not perfect, but you're someone who is constantly trying to get better and improve yourself. And then the step 3 is explain the results of you working to improve. So this could look something like, I've never been that good at sales. And I thought that was okay, but actually working in human resources, I've learned that there's a lot of internal sales that has to happen in order to get buy-in on a lot of my major projects. So what I've been doing is I've been reading To Sell is Human by Daniel Pink, and I've been doing this and that. And what I found is the last time I had a major proposal for a learning and development initiative that was going to have a budget of over $40,000, I was able to push it through 3 weeks faster because I started to integrate some of these selling principles. I still think I have a long way to go, but it's something I really want to keep working on, especially as I'm trying to gain higher leadership positions. So that could be an example of something you would say.
Got it. Yeah. And I remember I've gotten this question before in the past. And one of the things that I've used, and I don't know if it fits this framework, but one of the things I always said is that, in my background, I used to cover breaking news for a very large news organization. So, if someone started a war one night or something and I had to deal with it, I was really good at sort of containing my anxiety. I was terribly anxious. I have terrible anxiety problems. But one of the things that I always did was I was sort of, okay, I have to do the task at hand. It's just something that sort of you train at when you're dealing with breaking news. But one of the offsets is that when you're not in that environment, people sometimes don't think you take issues seriously because you're not getting outwardly flustered. So one of the things that I always try and give people heads up on is that I'm not going, I am freaking out on the inside, but I also just hate showing it on the outside. So when I applied for LinkedIn, I think that was actually my answer to this question, because I said basically, it's not that I don't take things seriously. It's just that I don't like showing my anxiety on the outside, which maybe isn't a good thing or healthy, but and that tends to be, sometimes people will be like, why aren't you freaking out? So that's my answer to the question.
Okay, well, if I ever need to defuse a bomb, I hope you're there in the room with me while I'm freaking out. You'll just be the calm person, like, all right, blue wire, red wire. Okay.
Yeah, well, I think we're both doomed in that situation because I don't know how to do that. And You know, and we have so many wonderful questions in the stream that I want to make sure we get to. So if you still have questions out there, please put them in, because we're going to start taking them right now. And I actually saw someone in the comments put this that I thought it was really great. And Amy, and I think she's basically saying that she got this question in the past, was asked, what did you dislike about your last job or position? And obviously you don't want to badmouth your previous employer. You don't want to, you know, especially if you're staying in the same field, you don't want to say, oh, I hate customers, if you're working in retail or something. But how do you answer those questions when you say, you know, this is why I want to move on from that employer, or this is something that I didn't really enjoy in that job? What's the best way to approach that question?
Definitely. I've personally asked this to candidates when I'm trying to deduce if they're right for the job, because you want to make sure that that this next job that they go into lights them up. It plays to their strengths. And so you do want to answer this question honestly, as long as the honest truth doesn't lose you the job. So let's say I am moving from a role where it's, you know, from social media marketing to more of SEO marketing. So you might say something of, you know, one of my least favorite parts about my job was it was very, I don't know, let's say it's just all the focus on like aesthetics and graphic design, when really I'm more someone who's like analytical, and I want to be able to, you know, deduce like what is like, do a lot of research and all that kind of stuff. So when you're saying that that's your least favorite part of your job, it's kind of almost explaining why you want to transition into this other role. And so that can sometimes really help you to answer the question, is noticing, okay, what does this role that I'm going for now, what is really great about that possibly was missing from my last role? And you can mark of, yeah, the fact that it was missing from this last role, you know, that's kind of why I'm excited about this one. And I'm seeing this as being a more attractive new opportunity.
Yeah, I think that's really good. And that's also another reason why you should, when you're applying for jobs, focus on the quality of the job and how excited you get about it, because you can genuinely answer that question and say, you know, one of the things that I really am excited about this position is that I have access to a whole new customer base, or, you know, I can expand what I already know, or something like that. And, you know, if you focus on the quality of the job and where you're applying instead of just applying everywhere, those answers might come a little bit easier. At least that's what I would think.
Thank you. Yes. All of this starts to become so much easier when you know yourself, you know what you want next, and you're very targeted. So you're not like constantly, okay, what was this job description again? Okay, what was different about this role from the other ones? No, if every role you're going for is clear towards a certain direction, exactly, you won't be fudging these answers.
Yeah, and another question that we have coming in from a few people, I see it, Paul asked it, and then we had Mary Jane, and it's a famously controversial question, but one that eventually will be asked, is starting salary. How should people approach conversations if it's broached during an interview? Obviously, there are some companies who will instruct people not to talk about it during interviews. There are others where maybe the rules are a little bit more lax and they will mention it in an interview. What is your suggestion for dealing with that?
I have been on the employer side of thousands of negotiations. I am the person who asked you that question in the interview. So I'm sorry, everyone. I am the culprit here as someone who's in human resources and recruiting. Often this question happens real early. It's like the first interview, right? And me, as someone who's been on this other side, I say avoid giving a number. How you do this is you say, well, you know, I'm open to the best overall package and fit. And they might say, that's really cute, but can you please give us a number? And you say, well, sure. I'm not sure. I don't have an exact number right now, but, you know, I could tell you if I'm comfortable with your range. Like, do you have a range? And sometimes the company will tell you their range, and that's perfect. Other times they will really push you for a number. And in that case, you might say, okay, well, I'm still kind of in the interview process, figuring out exactly my worth and all that. But I did do some salary research earlier this week. And I found that people in this city with these types of roles and these types of companies typically paid between X and Y. Does that fit with what you all are seeing in the market? And there you go, right? You just don't ever want to say, like, I need this number, because you basically you might lowball yourself, or you might totally highball yourself, and it just gets a bit more tricky.
Yeah, no, I think that is really good advice. In fact, there's someone that I talked to not too long ago. His name's Kwame Christian, and I'll put it in the chat right now. But he is basically a negotiation expert. And what he found is that, if you put a number out there early, it's an anchor, and everything that you basically go from then on. So if they mention something or you mention another number, will always be compared to that first number. So basically, if you wait until the end or wait until they throw out a number, you're in a much stronger position because that will be the anchor, and maybe you don't tie it too low. That way it doesn't seem, what they offer is so extraordinarily low compared to what you had, or maybe they offer lower because you already put out a number. So that's one of the things that I've taken away from that conversation with Kwame.
That's huge. Yes, exactly. And it's over the course of the interview process, they become more invested in you. Giving a price of how much your value is worth before they've even gotten to know you, they don't really know how to value that. But I have like private coaching clients, and I had one person who she just landed a role, and because I worked with her so much throughout the process for her to set herself at a very high value, and not money wise, but more of just the way she was perceived in the interview as a really high value candidate. When it came to finally at the end where I had her have them say a number first, she goes, "Oh my God, Madeline, they highballed me. They went tens of thousands of dollars way higher than what I would have asked, because she came to the interview so prepared, because she kind of had this elevated approach." And so, yes, exactly. Like, they anchored themselves way up higher. And so the only way that can really happen is if you have this incredible preparation, you have a lot of this deeper work done, and you really kind of then let things unravel as they will.
Yeah, definitely. And another thing that comes up, and we have a lot of people asking about this. I think Maria asked about this, and then Richard, and then we have David, which is how to deal with questions of ageism and concerns about that. Because a lot of people, they go into interviews, and if they're older, they're already facing a tougher prospect in the job market. But then they might go in there feeling that they're going to be discriminated against because they're older. So how do you suggest older job seekers go into those conversations?
Yes. So I would say that the idea of being older with the idea of being overqualified are often entangled in this funky web. And so let me tell you the rationale behind that. It is discrimination. So let's just call it what it is. But when employers are concerned about it, it's typically this idea of, oh, are we going to put this person in a role where their manager is younger than them, and they're just going to take this role because they need a job right now, but they're going to become bored. They're going to ask for a promotion very quickly because they have more years of experience or whatnot, or they're going to leave as soon as they find something that meets their, compensation requirements more, or meets their skill level more. Or if they're joining, there's this idea that, oh, they won't be adaptable. They won't learn new things. Yes, you've worked in marketing for 25 years, but if you're applying what you did 25 years ago in marketing to today, the marketing landscape has completely changed. So that, years of experience aren't equivalent to quality of experience and having a modern approach. So all of these things are all very tangled up. So Andrew, I'm going to give you the answer to your question. So what you need to do is you need to eradicate all of those worries. You need to focus on what excites you about this role and why it's going to be a growth opportunity for you, why this is the best next step. You're not going to say, well, I think I bring a lot of maturity to this role and I bring 25 years of experience. No, what you're going to say is, when I saw this role, I was so excited to see that I was going to get to work with React Native, because that's a language that I haven't had much of a chance to really dive into. And so I saw this as a wonderful opportunity to grow my career and learn from those peers around me. Okay, so that they're hungry for that type of stuff. And yet a lot of us don't necessarily go in that direction.
Yeah, I think that is honestly the best approach. And I've been in my professional life for more than a decade now, and I think everyone has that sort of bias to say, I deserve this job because I did X, Y, and Z. And like I said before, employers are very selfish entities. So they don't really care about what you did 10 years ago. They don't really care what you did last year. They want to see that on a resume, but they want to know what you're going to do for them a year from now, 3 months from now. So really, you need to go in there and say, listen, I am going to continue to upskill. I'm going to continue to work really hard, and this is what I'm going to do for you. So, that I think really starts in your 30s, where you start saying, I'm going to go in there with all this experience and get that job. But really, you have to turn it around and say, forget all of that. I do have those skills, and this is how I'm going to use them to help you. And walking in there with that confident mindset, if they are going to discriminate you, you can't necessarily control that. But what you can do is go in there with that attitude that overcomes that in the conversation. That way you can sort of leave it all on the table. And I think that's usually the best approach that people can really go into interviews with.
I completely agree.
Yeah. And also, one thing that I always want to mention too is that ageism concerns a lot of people. Like, I get messages from people that talk about, if they think someone alluded to their age or something in an interview. One of the things that's difficult about that is if you get wrapped up in those conversations where you say, oh, that might have been illegal or something like that. In the United States, at least, ageism lawsuits are very difficult to prove. So one of the things that's really important is to go in there and, like I said, leave it on the table, and don't worry too much about the legality of things, because they could actually, in the United States, ask you what your age is in an interview. The legal part would be is if they use that information against you in the hiring process. So it's a really difficult thing when it gets to the legal questions in there. But it's something that I always like to mention because I get a lot of questions about that. And Mark asked a really good question too, which is, what about questions you should be asking the employer? Because there's always that part in the interview where they say, do you have any questions for me? And I think Joseph said he's terrible at follow-up questions. So what is your advice for people when it comes to that part of the interview?
Yeah, so I think that there's 3 different categories that are really easy for you to remember to ask about. So asking about the interviewer, their experience, how long they've been at the company, what it's been like, what's evolved over the time at their company, all that stuff. People love talking about themselves. Ask them some questions about themselves. Second is about the team, right? Asking about team dynamics, asking about the company culture, the company dynamics, all of those things, company goals, that kind of stuff. And finally, the process. So, after you kind of ask more in-depth questions about the team, the company, the interviewer, you can ask about the process, about next steps and all that stuff.
Yeah, no, I think that's really good. And, when it comes to those questions, is it important to ask about culture and fit, things like that? Or one thing that I would be curious about, especially now in the pandemic environment, if it's an office-based job, is sort of how you keep your employees engaged. Do you think that's a fair question now, to basically say, listen, if I'm going to be home most of the time, how do I become part of this team, or what's the onboarding process like?
Completely. Yeah, I would say asking about the onboarding process, asking, what are the last few things you've done to interact with coworkers, maybe outside of a typical meeting and whatnot, and just see what kind of examples they come up with.
Yeah, and we have a comment here from Michael who says, I always ask what the greatest changes in the last year, coming year, is for the company. So I think that's really interesting to say, sort of, hey, listen, here's sort of a open-ended question for you, and to see how the employer reacts.
Totally. I like that one.
And then, there's always sometimes questions that come up for people that are difficult to answer because maybe they don't want to go into detail about why they left a job, or maybe why they had to leave a job by force if they were terminated. So Princess asks, how do you explain leaving a job that was terminated without saying you were fired or speaking negatively about the employer? And we also have a question I saw basically from someone saying, listen, I was, I resigned. How do I answer that question?
Yeah. So yeah, almost every company will ask you this. And just a heads up, y'all, I have videos on every single question you ever could imagine. It's all on my YouTube channel, Self-Made Millennial. So if we even don't get to your question today, it's definitely on there. And so you'll see the formula for this question as well and all of the questions we've discussed. So for why did you leave your last job? The question asker did hit on something that's important, which is to stay positive. So what's important is to stay positive and to keep your answer very short. This is a check the box question, not a go into deep detail about what happened last. So, just really typically frame your answer as kind of what you want next versus focusing on something that went wrong. So, maybe it's like, yeah, I had lots of growth opportunities at the company, but once I looked at what else I could do there, my growth was plateauing. And so when I, found your opportunity for X role, it was really the perfect direction I wanted to take my next role in. Okay, that was what, a 20-second answer, very brief, but you just really wanted to talk about it that briefly to say kind of why you're moving on.
Yeah, and I think in most cases, at least in my experience, job interviews, they're focusing on what's coming up or sort of the job that you're applying for. They may have sort of logistical questions about what happened at previous employers, but a lot of times I don't think they'll focus too much on past experiences, right? It's mostly going to be on what you can do for them.
Exactly.
Got it. And, another question that people have difficulty with are career gaps. And we have some questions here. One from Jeanette. Aishwara also wanted to ask about career gaps. So how should people answer questions about maybe why they took a few years off or why there's a gap in their resume? What is your suggestion for them?
I think, again, your answer should be a sentence or two. I think what people actually get into is they let their story kind of get wrapped up in their thing of like, well, I tried to get a job, but then my mother-in-law got sick, and then I did it. Instead of saying, I took off some time, of some personal time to take care of my family. I was really, fortunate to be able to do that. And now I'm excited as ever to come back to work and address that. And then I transitioned back into work after that, right? Just keeping it. You are the writer of your own story. You can either make it a pity party or you can make it an epic classic, but that's really up to you. So just making it brief, keeping it positive, and moving the heck on.
Yeah, I think that's such a good point because a lot of people, I think, they work themselves up about a career gap more than really what the employer is. And what I've learned from recruiters, and you've obviously been on the employer side of this, is that they just want the chronological order. They don't necessarily need that in-depth story. They just want to say, oh, okay, you had to take care of your mother. And I saw a question in the stream from Harika, who's asking about the pandemic gaps. And actually LinkedIn, we did some research on that because we wanted to see exactly who was affected by that and also what hiring managers thought of that. And the good news is that I think it was 96% of recruiters, hiring managers said, listen, we understand that the pandemic happened and we're not going to hold that against people. And, Madeline, what do you think about the pandemic career gap questions? Because there's a lot of people who took some time away from the workforce to take care of their children. There are people who, had to step away because they couldn't find work. What's your suggestion for people when they get that career gap question about the pandemic? I assume it's just sort of similar where they say, listen, I had to take some time away.
Yeah. It really comes down to your confidence. Okay. So that's something I work very close with my clients on, is finding the glory in their story. So, so many times we tell the wrong story, we give the wrong details, and they're details that the company doesn't need to know. And we use a lot of low value phrases and you don't even notice you're using them, but it again lowers your value. But if you're using high value phrases and really helping the company see, wow, this person, they hit some hard times, but they're bouncing back. They're loving what they're doing. That makes all the difference. So coming in with the confidence, owning it, the beautiful part about the interview process is that the resume, you write it yourself. All the interview questions, you answer yourself. Yes, maybe they might go do reference checks, but basically 95% of the entire interview process is you telling your own story You are the author. Write it. Write a great story.
Yeah, and also you touched on something that a few people are asking about. We have one question here from Tara, and then Jeremy highlighted a question from someone named Isabella, and which is basically how do you deal with nervousness in an interview?
One of the things that I've found to be help people a lot is taking the value of silence and pauses. So I've seen the way nerves manifest in a lot of people is talking very quickly, fidgeting, nodding a lot, and it really shows a lot of nervous energy, and it rubs off as a lack of confidence. So what I would say is slowing down, not being afraid of silence in the interview. You know, even if you were to ask me a question on this interview, Andrew, that I wasn't sure about the answer with, I'd say, hold on, let me gather my thoughts with that. What I would say to that is, right, and probably, put yes in the chat if that felt fine, if that felt normal, if you didn't think that I totally freaked out and was unconfident there. So put yes in the chat if you feel that, but no, if you don't. But I like to get both sides. But just taking that moment to breathe, think, it helps us to come across as more confident, even if we're not. Nerves are natural.
Got it. Yeah, no, I think that's really good. And especially, my background is in journalism, and the thing that we teach is that silence is often good in a conversation, because that, is something that, someone else will fill. So if you don't have something to add and you just leave it there, they might fill in some additional information, or they may sort of reframe the question for you, or you could even just ask them to reframe the question. And actually I got ahead of myself with the one question from Isabella. Her question was actually, how do you sell yourself when you don't have a lot of experience in that area? And I think sometimes people run into this if they're changing careers, or maybe if they're taking a chance on a different job that's a little bit outside of their area of expertise. What's your suggestion for that, where they're not necessarily feeling confident in that specific position or that role?
I would say you better prepare the heck out of before your interviews. You better have done all of your research about the company. You better be doing side projects, doing work that is really building these skills, even if it's unpaid work. You need to show why would a company just take a risk on you? That doesn't make any sense. Why would you just take a risk on getting a surgeon who's never done a surgery on a human before? Unless they were like, no, I was top of my class at school, and like, look at all this work I've done on cadavers, and I have all this stuff. Like you need to get that risk away from folks. So make sure that you're showing up to the interview, not saying, hey, take a chance on me. I'll probably do a good job, and show them. I do something in my private coaching program called like a show don't tell, where you're able to really illustrate your skills versus you self-describing, saying, oh, I'm a really hard worker and I'll show up on time. No, you have to make sure to bridge that gap of that risk that the employer is perceiving.
Yeah, I think that's really good. And we have a few questions in the stream, which I think are really good, especially for right now, which is, let's see here, from Aziz, what are your top tips for Zoom interviews as opposed to in-person interviews? And Madeline, I know you're the queen of video, so what are your tips for Zoom interviews?
Andrew, I have gone live on LinkedIn. This is my 10th day straight of going live on LinkedIn.
I've received all of the notifications. I'm like, oh, it's day 9. It's day
It's day 10. Andrew, I'm going dark. As soon as we turn off this interview, I'm out, man. Like, I cannot be on screen anymore. But that's a really good question. So, for example, one thing that I've jerry-rigged in front of me right now is I made my computer eye level. Now, my camera's typically up here. You would then be looking down on me, Andrew. It creates a strange dynamic between you and me and everyone watching if your camera is in different angles. If you look down on me, it actually appears like I am at a lower status of you and maybe not as respectable. If I look down at the camera, it almost feels like I'm looming over you and I feel intimidating or not friendly. And so weird dynamics like that, you really have to pay attention to in the video interview. Also, I really don't like video interviews compared to phone and in person because there's just so many other forms of bias that come into place. You can judge my socioeconomic status by my background and all those different types of things. So really just, unfortunately, just understanding that human psychology is human psychology. It's not that people are intentionally cruel, but there's just these thought processes that go in our mind. So really thinking about how am I appearing on camera? How is my lighting? All of those things are super important. But a lot of the principles of an in-person interview still stand in a video interview. So you're creating rapport. You are, just really trying to connect with them. And so yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of benefits because there's no travel time and all of that. But I think just really being very conscious of the dynamics that are happening because you're creating your own space.
Yeah, I think that's really great advice. And one thing that I always suggest to people too is do a dry run with a friend, which is basically call them on Zoom, call them on Skype or whatever video chat they might be using for the interview or whatever's comparable, and have a conversation with them and have them give you feedback on what felt comfortable to them, what they thought you did good, maybe what you needed to improve, because those conversations get you used to the technology, and they could say, hey, what was really distracting? That light in the corner. That way you don't have to worry about all of that during the interview. The other thing that I got early on in the pandemic, because I sort of had to learn this on the fly because we didn't have our production team in my living room, unfortunately, is that always look into the camera and, like you said, make it eye level, because it could be really awkward if you're looking at the actual person on the screen. But if you're looking at the camera, you're creating more of a natural connection with them. Whereas if you're looking at the screen, there's just something kind of off about it. And it takes a little bit of practice, but you'll get it, because right now, actually, Madeline on my screen is down here. So if I were to actually look at her, it would be really awkward. This would not be a good show. But when you look into the camera, it's a little bit more tolerable.
That's the secret, Andrew. You're in my periphery right now too, but no one might never know. So yeah, It's a really good point.
And I guess on that same topic, we have a question here from Ada about dressing for interviews. So what is your suggestion when it comes to maybe dressing for in-person interviews versus dressing for video interviews? Should they be the same? Do you have to show up for an interview in a 3-piece suit? How does that work out?
Okay, Andrew. So I hear some people say, no matter what, you got to show up in your suit. That is just, they say, I stand by that. I will always do that. And it totally depends on the industry. I have unfortunately seen people show up in suits, and I can't come from the technology industry. It is not a good idea. I'm telling you that right now. If you are understanding it's a more casual environment, you show up in a suit, people just immediately think you're an accountant or a lawyer auditing us or suing us. Like, they don't think that you're one of the team members. So again, human psychology, it's a messed up, wacky world up there. But so you want to typically dress like the employees at the company do, which you can either look at photos online or just simply ask whoever you're coordinating with. They'll typically give you some tips. And I typically dress a step up. So if you're noticing everyone in the office is typically wearing t-shirts and jeans, I might wear a shirt with buttons, okay? Just a button and a collar. It doesn't have to be like a really nice dress shirt, but just something that looks like I respect this interview and I care about how I come off. So ripped jeans and a graphic t-shirt, maybe leave that till once the offer is presented and you're working there. But just take it a little step up.
Yeah. What about a fake tuxedo t-shirt? No?
Ooh, okay. Okay. I like that. It says I'm taking this kind of seriously, but I'm also,
it might actually, I wouldn't recommend that for almost any interview, but it might work in the tech industry.
That's true.
Yeah.
That's true.
Yeah. And I guess, what would be, for people watching, what is your number one interview tip? If you have very little time to prepare, maybe they call you and say, hey, can you meet with someone this afternoon? What is your number one tip for people?
I truly think that it really is not necessarily about you answering the questions with these quick little tricks, but the war is won before the battle is fought. If you do have a short amount of time, I'm on LinkedIn, I'm looking at the interviewers, I'm understanding their career path, I'm getting that context. I'm looking up the company online, getting some quick information. How are they funded? What are some different things that have happened to them in the past year? Literally anything. It's amazing how little research you have to do in order to impress the employers, because the bar is so low. So many people, and because I've done so many interviews at this point, so few people, they go, oh, what company is this for? No, do your research and really bring that with genuine interest and curiosity into the interview process.
Such a good point. And also, if you focus on the quality of your applications, you'll already have some of that research done. So it's not that you're just going, oh my God, what company is this?
Andrew, yes. In my coaching program, I teach a low volume job search approach. I don't have them apply online. I don't have, I applied to 100 jobs this week. No, it's like, all right, you just focus on a few different ones. You skip the online applications, and yeah, it's the results are incredible.
Yeah. And now, to all of you out there watching, I know you're getting so much out of this conversation, but I have a question for you, which is, I hope you will answer some questions for us about today's show. So we're going to be showing you what is a link and a QR code on the screen. So navigate to that link or aim your camera at that QR code on your screen, and it will pop up a survey and tell us a little bit about what you thought about today, answer the questions, because basically we want these shows to be helpful to you. I'm sure you found today's helpful, but you could tell us a little bit about maybe what topics you'd like us to cover in future episodes, because we have more career talks scheduled and planned, so be sure to watch out for those. But like I said, use that QR code, follow that link, and let us know your thoughts, because we're wanting to hear from you, and we're wanting you to basically help us make these shows better and more helpful to you, because that is the aim. That is why we do these. So like I said, answer those questions and we'll really appreciate it. And we also appreciate Madeline Mann, who was here joining us. Madeline, thank you so much for your time.
This has been my absolute pleasure, Andrew. It's always fun to be back on Career Talks, and thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, thank you. And Madeline Mann is a career coach. She's also the creator of Self-Made Millennial. And I think we're going to be showing some resources and how to follow Madeline on LinkedIn. Make sure you do that. And you could also find her website and the interview prep worksheet that so many of you were asking about in the comments. You can see all of that there. You can take a screenshot. And also, if you don't worry, because you can just replay this video at the same link in the same post. That way you could always have this. So if you're going into an interview next week and you want a refresher, you could just play this video again. So thank you all so much for joining us. I'm so happy you were here today. I know you must have gotten so much out of this conversation. Madeline is such an incredible expert. And please stay safe and take care of yourself. You could only be a good candidate. You could only get hired if you're safe and well enough to do so. So follow your local health guidelines, because the pandemic is still going on. And until next time, best of luck.